I'm so excited right now. This is the culmination of a lot of months of work for a lot of people. My name is Megan. I am the Words of Music Festival Director. And welcome to opening night. So, I've been directing Words of Music since 2018. The festival actually began in 1997 as a project of the Pirates Equality Society. And in 2017, after 20 years, they passed it on to One Book, One New Orleans, which is a local nonprofit. We do tons of events all around the city. And our goal is to break down barriers that prevent people from accessing books. Whether that barrier is low literacy, or physical access to books, or incarceration, or a blindness or visual impairment, we're trying to make sure that there is a book in your hand if you'd like to read it. So, we took over the festival in 2018 on January 1, and on 2023, so it's our third year here at the Andrea Center for Performing Arts and Cultural Justice. And I say that to say that from 2018 till now, our festival bookseller has been Tubby and Coo's Traveling Bookshop. They have all the books of anyone that you will find on the festival lineup. There's a QR code that you all should have received on a flyer. You can scan it, you can get the festival website, find all the speakers, all the books, everything. If you didn't get one coming in, grab one on the way out. We'd love to see you back sometime between now and Saturday evening. So, when we moved here on Bayou Road, we had to recognize that we were moving our venue next door to the oldest Black-owned bookstore in the city. That's Community Book Center. So even though we had a festival bookseller and a long-established relationship, we could not be here and not acknowledge and in some way support that space as well. So what we do is every single session like this one, we give out a $25 Community Book Center gift card. So you all can come here and buy festival books, and then you can go there and buy other books. And to do that, there is a beautiful randomizer when y'all registered online. You just hit a little randomizer, and it tells you who pulls a name for you. And that name the randomizer pulled was Jordan here. Jordan here? Hey, there's Jordan. See what happens when you register? You get prizes. And now I'm going to get out of the way and let these folks do their thing. I'm going to introduce Richard A. Webster, and then Richard is going to introduce the panel. I'm going to paraphrase your bio. Richard A. Webster is a reporter with Verite News. He covers a lot of stories on incarceration, and I believe one led to a pretty deep investigation and some justice cases. He'll tell you more about that. And on that, I'm just going to say that and get out the way. All right, without further ado, jump into our
First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I would like to introduce our editor-in-chief from Verite News, Terry Baque. Can you please stand up, Terry? So first, I'm going to introduce the panel. I'd like to introduce everybody to the City of New Orleans' newly elected Clerk of Criminal District 1. Summarize it. Mr. Duncan spent more than 28 years in Angola prison after being sentenced to life in connection with the 1981 shooting. During his time in prison, Mr. Duncan became what is known as an inmate counsel substitute, basically a paralegal helping his fellow inmates draft legal motions, and in many cases that resulted in their freedom. Mr. Duncan was released in 2011 after pleading guilty to a lesser charge. The district attorney only agreed to this deal following the discovery of a raft of evidence that called into question the legality of Mr. Duncan's prosecution, while also pointing to his innocence. 10 years later, a court threw out Mr. Duncan's conviction, finding him to be factually innocent. So despite what his former opponent in the clerk of court's race says, Calvin Duncan is officially in the registry of men and women who have been fully exonerated. Next to Mr. Duncan is Sophie Cull, co-author of the Jailhouse Lawyer. Ms. Cull, originally from Australia, is a criminal justice reform advocate focusing on the death penalty, life sentences, and prosecutorial misconduct. She is also one of the founders of the Visiting Room Project, which is a one-of-a-kind collection of over 100 filmed interviews with people serving life without parole at Angola. It is a unique achievement, and I can't recommend it enough. Ms. Cull met Mr. Duncan while they were working at a New Orleans law office, and while driving back and forth to Shreveport, where they were campaigning for the removal of the Confederate flag from a courthouse lawn, Ms. Cull and Mr. Duncan began to discuss Mr. Duncan's life, which sparked the idea for their book, which is also both beautifully written and fascinating. Again, I can't recommend that enough. And then we have Nick Weldon, who is the senior editor at the historic New Orleans collection. He is also editor of Captive State. That book is based on a long-running exhibit at the museum that provides much-needed historical context to understand how someone like Mr. Duncan could end up imprisoned at Angola for nearly 3 decades for a crime he didn't commit. In his introduction to the book, Mr. Weldon outlines the more than 300-year history that turned Louisiana into the world's incarceration capital. He says, quote, "Louisiana's notoriety in this regard is not an accident, but rather a consequence of decisions made by people in power here throughout its history. In 2025, Louisiana will commit more than $1 billion to its vast carceral apparatus." And then finally, we have Andrea Armstrong. She's a law professor. She's a law professor at Loyola University and the 2023 recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant. And I'll read from a recent Washington Post profile, which did a great job of summing up her endless accomplishments. Quote, "Over the past decade, Armstrong has worked on a far-reaching lawsuit that restored the right to vote to most people on parole or probation in Louisiana. She helped lead a successful ballot referendum effort that forced Louisiana to adopt unanimous juries, and she is a leading expert on prison and jail conditions who has visited 30 facilities across the nation and is certified by the Justice Department as a Prison Rape Elimination Act auditor. Ms. Armstrong also founded the Incarceration Transparency Project, an online database of information about the deaths in every prison, jail, and youth detention facility in Louisiana and South Carolina since 2015, which is an unbelievable accomplishment. And she helped create an exhibit at the historic New Orleans collection, which is the subject of Captive State. So thank you, John. So hopefully this is just going to be sort of a discussion, and it's not going to be very rigid with all questions and everything, but I do have an initial question. First, I just want to start out by exploring the conditions of prisons in Louisiana. In Captive State, Major Amos Stoddard is quoted in 1812 saying of the Cabildo, "It was a wretched receptacle of vice and misery. Like the grave, it received many tenants who were soon forgotten by the world." In another section, following a series of lawsuits in the 1970s, a judge described conditions in Angola as something that should, quote, "shock the conscience of any right-thinking person." And finally, in Jailhouse Lawyer, Mr. Duncan poignantly describes a truly painful period after decades behind bars where he had lost hope and considered suicide. Quote from the book, "He had always believed that if he helped others, God would meet him halfway. But what if God didn't show up?" So this begs the question, how do people survive life in prison, mentally and spiritually? Can people who have never been incarcerated truly comprehend what that experience is like? And why do these conditions persist throughout time?
Okay, so.
That's it for me.
The first question. The first,
Sure. So basically the first question, like, how do people survive life in prison physically, mentally, and spiritually?
So how do people survive in prison is with hope. That's what we struggle with. We try to reach on the hope. That first, that our situation is not as bad as it seems. Because you know, in civic school, in high school, I took the civic class, and you learn about the government, that the state is going to give you a lawyer, and your lawyer is going to represent you, and the judge is going to make sure that your rights are protected, and that the prosecutor is there not to prosecute you, but to seek justice, and you believe all of that stuff. You know, they tell us that when we're in fifth grade, and they get locked up. And then other people is telling you that, look, all that stuff just was textbooks. It's not really, it's meant to be happen, but it won't happen for you because you don't have the funds to really obtain it. But the key thing to surviving in prison is hope. And I'm generally always trying to convince lawyers, don't go into prison and take that hope. Because some lawyers, feel and believe that their job is to make sure that the client don't have any, what they call false hope. But it's the hope thing and helping one another. That's a thing that's resonated in the book. By helping each other, we become a community. And we just, because we won't help, we do for us. Like I did for others what I wanted done for me. So the brief answer is, you we hold on to that hope that it's going to get better, and that when we go to court, when we step foot in that court, they're going to realize that an injustice has occurred. And that's all we have is that one day that's going to happen, and then, we cling on to God, because they're hoping that God intervenes when we realize that, this criminal legal system is really a barbaric system intended to crush the spirit of everybody in touch, except wealthy people. And then with it, they have the funds to prevent it. But it's the hope that actually, and the hope that God intervenes, and then everything will be all right. And the second question was?
The second question was, the second question is not all that important. So why do you think these conditions persist throughout time? Because we read a quote from 1812, the 70s, and your experiences from the 80s through present time. Like, why does it seem that there's such a lack of progress, or there's the same through line about how these places are?
Yes, because we live in a society where our behavior is dictated by the lawmakers. Our representatives represent us and they pass laws. But what happened, I've noticed that there are some representatives that would introduce a law that's intended to crush people. But the rest of the legislatures don't know that intent, and they go along with it. So I think why it persists is that there always is one or two evil people out that we have given that kind of power to, and the laws get passed, and then when we realize that it's causing harm, that is, we bring it to the attention to the media, to the courts, then the body of representatives, lawyers or judges or whoever it is, then now they take on this attitude that they got to protect the next person who introduced the law. They're gonna go along even though that they know that what was introduced now is shown to be harm. So the brief answer is that we elect people that in some cases have a sole purpose of crushing us, but they don't reveal it. And when we find out that it's actually happening, and that's a difficult task of finding out because prison is isolated. If lawyers don't come in, if pro bono lawyers don't come to help us, then the outside world would never know. And so if I had to nail anything, it's the people that we elect to office, whether it's a judge, a prosecutor. And let me give an example. There was one prosecutor put 6 people on death row. in New Orleans and created a trophy. Put their picture on that trophy and had it on his desk. And all of those people off that trophy, 5 of them has been totally exonerated from death row, and 1 went to trial and he was found guilty and given a life sentence. But that's how much power that we have given, we had gave that one person.
You know, you bring up that Stoddard quote, which is from 1812, and you know, what we're talking about is a through line, and Dr. Armstrong actually brought this up in the foreword to the book, which is these quotes describing jail conditions and prison conditions in Louisiana, and how similar these descriptions are through the centuries. And kind of to your question about why is this so consistent through time, I think Calvin's exactly right. It's about people and the people who are empowered to make these choices. Specifically, it's the legacy of white supremacist laws dating back to the Code Noir of 1724. So we're going back to the French founding of Louisiana. And this evolution of law and the people who are passing laws, imposing laws, it is a system, it's structural. And that through line we surface in Captive State is the upholding of a system of segregation of 2 sets of laws for white and black people. And unfortunately, that is something that has been consistent through the history of this state. You talked about hope, Calvin, and you know, something that we really struggled with Captive State was once you go through the gauntlet of this exhibit, or in this case, the book, is there hope after you've experienced and read all this information? And you know, I was actually rereading Jailhouse Lawyer the other day, and you mentioned in that book this idea of a pendulum. I think that may have come from Norris. And the idea that, you know, the pendulum swings in terms of, I think he was talking about the Supreme Court. You know, conservative, liberal, you know, it swings through time. And I think we have to capture, you know, those of us who want to see change to this system, windows of opportunity. Because the weight of the history can be crushing, but there are moments and there are windows where we can change things. And just to give an example, you know, we talked about in the book the history of the non-unanimous jury law, you know, which a lot of folks up here were involved in. I don't know why I'm talking about it, but we changed that as a state in 2018. And that was a window of opportunity to correct a Jim Crow legacy wrong that not a lot of places had to deal with, but we did it. So I think that although there is this through line of upholding kind of a white supremacist system through law and through people in power, imposing this system through the enforcement of the laws, there are windows of hope and change that you have to seize upon when they're there.
So I think I'm going to contribute to a different part of the question, right? And one of the things is, so what do I see as a visitor versus what people experience who live there? I will never know what it is to live 24 hours under the total control of another human being who controls the air, the food, the water, the dress, the temperature, the smell, the access to my family, the access to water, the access to a shower, the access to the sun, the ability to see the moon, the ability to touch the grass. I hopefully will never have that. And I don't think that I can understand that. But what I can understand is when I visit multiple facilities, that the things that people talk about behind bars are not isolated to their place. And it's not isolated to a thing that they did. Right? So once you walk through the door, the only difference necessarily between you and somebody else who committed a different crime is how long you're supposed to be there. But y'all get the same meal of grade F ground meat, right? Y'all drink the same water that looks cloudy and orange. That doesn't depend on what you're being punished for, right? And so we have this idea that people are deserving behind bars of this horrible treatment because they supposedly, because we know so many innocents, because they supposedly did something wrong, but what the punishment is doesn't differentiate between what they actually did. It's like this false lie that we tell ourselves. All to say that when you visit, you can see the continuity and understand that this is not about punishment or guilt. It's about control. And when you see that, it helps you also see incredible beauty in people who are behind bars. Because even in systems that are designed to break and control, people create pockets of freedom. One of my favorite things about Calvin is when we talked about the non-unanimous jury law, there was a constitutional amendment, there was a campaign, there were people wearing shirts here, lots of people here probably voted for it. It was Mr. Duncan who kept filing at the U.S. Supreme Court. And did you say, don't make me file another one? Right? Like, it is that persistence and determination in an environment that is designed to extinguish it that I find incredibly inspiring and really hopeful.
And then just on that, yes, Sophie, well, I wanted to ask you, in writing the book with Calvin, were there any, as you're listening to all of these stories that he's telling you about the many decades he spent in prison, were there any that sort of stuck out to you where, you know, it was sort of shocking to you, or you sort of got a sense of what it must have been like? I mean, just can you talk a little bit about that?
Can I tell a positive one?
Yes.
Shocking in a good way?
No, absolutely.
Okay. So I've been visiting Angola since I first moved here from Australia. It's the prison I have the most experience spending time at with people. And even so, when Calvin told me this story, I'll admit that I went and looked for third-party documentation. Not because I didn't believe Calvin, but because I was like, if we're going to put this in the book, we're going to need to like back up what Calvin's saying. I'm sure Nick you'll appreciate. So it was a story of when, so one of the ways that we've made sure that people who go to prison stay in prison is by closing the courthouse doors on them once they're there, and making sure that when they try to appeal their cases or have claims that show the injustice of what was done to them brought before the courts, that the courts have a way of not listening to that by first telling them, you came too late, you didn't meet the deadline, wait for the thing, so therefore I don't really care what's in the thing. And that's always, you know, to some degree being a way that the courts have controlled access to justice. But in the 80s and the 90s, when we were shoving people through the front door, we closed that back door even more by imposing these procedural rules that Calvin spent most of his career as a jailhouse lawyer helping people overcome. So in 1991, the first and most significant of those passed aimed at making sure that applications for post-conviction relief couldn't be considered by courts if they were filed a certain time after the original conviction was imposed. And I'll let Calvin tell you all the reasons why that deadline was incredibly cruel. But what happened when he discovered that this law had passed, which he didn't discover until it had passed, 6 months earlier, because it was 1991, and so the prison got notice of, new laws that had passed like 6 months afterward, and this new law was going into effect after 1 year. So Calvin realized they had 6 months to try to figure out a way to help everybody in the prison file a post-conviction application before that deadline came into effect. And by the time they figured out what they could and couldn't do about that, it was a matter of weeks, really, that they had to try to help everybody file. So at this point, Angola had 4,000 or 5,000 people there, and there weren't 60 inmate council back then, right? There were 54 by then? Okay.
No.
Back then, I think it was like
it was like,
20?
I think it was about 15 of us.
15, yeah.
The whole prison.
15 lawyers, 5,000 clients. Even a public defender would balk at that one. So Calvin and Norris and Chico, who many of you will have heard of or know, got together and tried to figure out what are we going to do. And they went to another inmate counselor who at the time had a good relationship with the warden, and kind of came up with the idea that if they could print these applications and find a way to get them out to everyone in the prison, that they could try to do their best to give everyone an opportunity to file on time. So a group of them approached the warden and laid that out, and the warden agreed to actually help them. So on a day before the deadline, a couple of weeks before the deadline, the prison organized to shut down, after work call, shut down the prison for a while, meaning no one went anywhere outside of their dormitory or their cell, and the inmate councils went around to the different camps and stood ready. The printing shop at Angola, which is also run by incarcerated people, stayed up like through the night for days on end, printing these petitions until they had like 4,000 or 5,000. And then the inmate council spread out through the prison, and Norris and this other council got on the radio with the lawyer, Keith Nordyke, who had also come in to try to help, had helped bring in computers and stuff to try to make it work. But 1991 computers, mind you, so I should say a word processor. And they actually got on the radio and started to explain how to fill out the application. And then the radio station sent that message through to all the camps, and then the council stood ready to try to help people who were illiterate or didn't understand what was happening or trying to figure out what to do to implement the advice being given over the radio. And petition by petition, person by person, they filled out those applications, and by the end of the day, they had over 2,000 applications ready to file. And then the prison helped with the mailing process to make sure that those petitions were the mailing was certified, so that if one got lost in the mail, the court would have independent proof that it had been filed on time. So this gargantuan effort, these 15 councils got together and figured out a way to meet the need. And to me, that was staggering on so many levels, logistically, you know, and but also just at the core, just the spirit of people who say, as Calvin would say, not on my watch.
Yeah, that was, but yeah, before I say this, when I was in prison, I used to wonder, I said, why do people on the outside not reading the Constitution? That's the thing that governs us. And if you know, this just the Bill of Rights, and it's not a lecture, it's 10. And back then they knew they're all group of people that need serious protection from us, from rule makers, people that's in power. So half of the Bill of Rights is directed to protecting people accused of crime. 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th for short. And the first, petition the government when you agree and right to access to the court. Now that was way back then, and they knew that the people that's going to need the most protection is people accused of crimes. And so how they manipulated that is that some kind of way it's not so clear, so they passed laws that would crush us so easily, like what Sophie was describing. This law was going to bar all of us out of court. We was going to be condemned. We was already condemned, but we wasn't going to be able to petition the court once we got access to our records. And that was a problem here in New Orleans, getting access to those records. But then we went to the warden and said, look, this thing gonna kill us. And the warden like, look, what y'all need to do. And the warden shut the whole prison down after work hours, and we try to meet everybody's deadline. And it was easy for us to do that because we understood that who needs the most protection is people accused of crimes. And that's how we get mass incarceration. Louisiana is on the top of the list, and a lot of them come from here in New Orleans. But I always used to wonder, did people forget that half of the Bill of Rights is intended to protect protect people accused of crime. The most vulnerable people in our society need the most protection, and it seems some kind of way that had already been, I don't know how people just don't think about that, so I'm always thinking about it.
Okay, so the next question is on that. So it seems that there's this dichotomy regarding the criminal justice system. It is so often plagued by errors and bad actors that result in grave injustices, and yet often it is the one thing that can deliver justice and freedom, as was the case with you, Mr. Duncan. But even that truth seems somewhat fragile. And there's a quote from the Jailhouse Lawyer in which one of your friends at Angola says this of the Supreme Court, quote, "We're only protected by the Constitution as much as those 5 justices want us to be protected. When the judges on the court change, so do our rights." So the question, sort of a broad question, is, what is the best vehicle for change? Like, is it the law? Is it legislation? Is it public opinion? Or is it sort of all of the above, as was the case maybe in non-unanimous juries? So, yeah.
I would say education. We need to start talking to each other. Really. Education. Like, if we know, the 13th Amendment clearly says, we never wanted to get rid of slavery. That's something we love. We love to put people in bondage. It's clear that slavery is abolished except for conviction. So let's convict a bunch of people. Now, once we read that, it's, somebody needs to be protecting our thirst to put people in bondage and put them in slavery. And I think it's an education. It's telling people, this is what the law is, this is what this clown over here introduced, this is how it's going to affect your right. And then in prison, what I learned was that 5 people determines how we live. 5 Supreme Court judges. And so when on the inside we say, man, when we get out there, we educate people about these laws, about the power that the Supreme Court has, and when the election time come, we're gonna tell them you better go out there and better go elect somebody that's gonna a person that's gonna protect your rights. And then we see that one person was elected, and guess what? It proved exactly what Joe Washington said in the book. Your rights your liberty is based upon what at least 5 people say in the United States Supreme Court. That blew my mind. And then when coming home, talking to people about this stuff, it's like, I don't want to hear that stuff. And then I understand why they don't, because they think they won't be touched by it. That, my child is okay, where I have enough money, and they just think that it doesn't apply. But once we saw this in our lifetime, that not going out to vote caused us to get he who cannot be named, and he who cannot be named was smart enough to know what Joe Washington knew. Let's appoint a bunch of Supreme Court judges. It's going to strip all of the liberties that they don't like. And so I think the key thing is we need to start talking to each other. We need to educate each other, explain what the consequences of some of these things are, and just constantly do that. And when we see injustice, we do something about it, and not just say, well, it's just those people.
So, one idea that I think is really important to creating change is something that Brian Stevenson has talked a lot about, which is proximity. Right? Getting close. Proximity.
Speak up.
Oh, sorry. Hi. So, it's thinking about proximity and getting close and like being present with people wherever they are, right? And that means families who are taking bus rides 2-3 hours to visit their loved ones, right? It means that everybody should be going to their local jail and prison. Y'all absolutely should. You should be going there. You should say hello. You say, you're operating with my tax dollars. What's going on? What's the menu? what programs are we running? Maybe you could start a book club in the local youth detention center, which some people in our audience have done, right? It is about proximity and getting close. Because once you're close, you can see, you can communicate, you can strategize. And one of the things that Calvin mentioned and that I think is symbolic of how we practice incarceration today is it is designed to separate us. It is designed, like, the power to keep people in has become translated into the power to keep people out. And so during the civil rights era, you can see pictures of folks in cells, right? Because journalists used to have free access to walk into a jail with a camera and talk to people and interview them cell side. We can't do that anymore. Visitation is almost eliminated. We don't have in-person visitation in New Orleans. I don't know if y'all know this about our own jail. There is no in-person visitation. And so people would go around the corner to bring their kids and their babies to wave to their loved ones in the little pod. And people didn't like what was happening there, so they boarded up from the inside with steel plates so that people can't even see their babies from across the street. So all to say that we need to get proximate, and part of the reason we get proximate is so that we can see more clearly. And that, I think, is the beginning of the answer. And then last, a shout out to the Historic New Orleans Collection, because one of the things that made this project so incredible was they decided to get proximate. And Nick can tell you more about that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if we have control of the slides, but maybe you could skip ahead a little bit. There's two books here. But yeah, I think what you just said about proximity and what Calvin said about education is really central to this. And in the exhibition of Captive State, how many of y'all went to the exhibit at the Historic Law? Okay, quite a few of you. So you know, we used a number of methods to get people proximate to these stories. We had interactives where you got to see people's testimonials on video. You saw huge data graphics kind of towering over you about the data involved in this. We had what we called the gauntlet, which was a section toward the end of the exhibit where you're passing by kind of a recreated jail cell across from a wall that showed a video of the build-out of the Tulane Broad jail campus over the 20th century and the explosion of jail facilities there. So all of this was to get people close to the stories, get people close to the facts. I think you need the law, I think you need elections, but it all starts with that kernel of truth and education for people to just be awakened to what's going on in their name, with their tax dollars. And, I like to say, data, like some of the stuff that we have in this book can help you win an argument, but human connection is what stirs your soul. So you need both.
Angola used to be the bloodiest prison in America. What helped us in prison was Keith Norite and other people they would actually come to the prison. Well, Keith Norite would bring those federal judges, and those federal judges would actually get proximate. They would see us. How we got help with the Innocent Project was a third-year law student that came to the prison, and we explained to her, look, we can't get our records. That's retarded. Crazy, we can't get our records from the court that sent us here. And she said, once I graduate, I'm gonna help y'all. And she did, and that's how the New Orleans Innocent Project was created. If you all have the Captive State, if you look at the I think it's the back of you see it?
Yeah. There's Calvin's name.
Now, look at this cell. Any parent that look at this picture, their kids. It is a 4-man cell with 6 people in it. Now just imagine, this is the way we live there. This is the way they force us to live. Look how dingy they look. And if you ask yourself, where is the commode? So it's 6 people, 2 sleeping on the floor and 4 in the bunks. So you just look at this picture, and if, like, a parent, anybody would look at this picture and say, no, this is unbelievable. And that's what we want. We was kids, and they was packing us in that jail like we was like they was sending people from Africa to this country on a slave ship. So just that picture alone shows, and guess where it was happening? Right here in this city on our watch. I would always say that Tulane and Broad, the parish jail was hell, and comparatively, Angola was paradise. And again, like Professor Armstrong said, we need to get close. Go see. And if you see it and if it don't move you, then but at least you saw it. And I got faith when people see it, they can automatically say, what can I do to help?
It brings to mind the same warden who recognized that there was a cruelty being done in the imposition of that procedural rule. There's also another point in the book where we reference something he said about being a young guard at Angola in the 70s, and he saw a man who had been stabbed in the intestines. And I'm sorry for the description, but part of his intestine was hanging out of his body. And Warden Whitley, who was a young man at the time, said, by then I had seen so much that when I saw him walking up the hallway, and then I saw another prisoner come to help him, I just turned back and went to my post. Like, that's good enough. He'll make it or he won't. But he was so desensitized that he could see a man walking, staggering along with his intestines outside his body, and just think another day on the job. And I think that there are people in these facilities, and it makes me actually want to ask you a question, Andrea, because there's a warden who did this in the book, and I've heard other wardens in other states say this. There are times where they actually want to be sued, because when we talk about methods for change, they see that as, they describe it at least, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, as the way that they best know how to argue for things to be different, whether that's some resources from their legislature to address some of these conditions, or giving permission for them to act, essentially, when higher-ups are telling them to ignore the issues. But the fact that we would actually have people in the institutions who run them sometimes saying, I want to be sued because I don't feel like I have other tools to address these issues, to me is really startling. And I guess it suggests to me that courts are really a backstop, but they're not a way to make progressive change. Andrea, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that as someone who's dealt with so many of these administrations.
I mean, listen, Angola has been under a constant consent decree for its health care, which most recently was declared unconstitutional again for the exact same reason that it was declared unconstitutional back in the 70s. And it's been under court supervision that whole time, y'all. So I think that it does happen that we see inside actors say the way that I get more resources is come sue me so that I have a judge's order. I think the better question is, why do we think that giving more resources is going to lessen the direction of control, right? Instead, we might think about giving resources to other groups, right? And so what does a prison know about running a post office? They're not trained in that. They don't know nothing about it. So the U.S. Post Office should be running the Angola Post Office and controlling how people get their mail. What do we know about libraries? And why does a prison think that it can run a library? They didn't study library science. Why doesn't our public library have a branch inside the prison and run that? So I would rather think about the funds going to our Department of Health and have them run the health care, right? What does prison know about running a healthcare system or picking a healthcare provider, right? And so I think you're right that historically we've seen it. I also think historically we haven't seen the types of changes that people deserve. And instead, we should think differently about who gets which resources and with what expectations and how do we hold them accountable for it.
Megan. I don't know how much time we have for audience questions. So one thing as a reporter who covers criminal justice issues, which I find to be one of the biggest sort of obstacles or impediments, is getting the readers to actually care about what you're writing about. Because it's hard when you think that you've exposed this great injustice and the story goes out and the response from people is, well, they committed a crime and they're in prison. So maybe this sort of, the answer to this question is the same as the last about firsthand experience, but I don't even know if that will change their mind. So how do you get those people to understand that this is something that needs to change? Like, how do you affect their opinion? These sort of people who have this sort of like stone wall in front of them and just see people in prison as criminals and don't deserve anything. Like, how do you break through that?
I can start real quickly, just, something that we have the advantage of being a museum in the heart of the French Quarter and being a free museum in the heart of the French Quarter is that we engage with a lot of tourists kind of by accident. People who might walk in to use the restroom and discover an exhibition about mass incarceration. So, which happened. And so I think we're in a unique position where we can kind of get people who aren't seeking it out, which I think is a big thing. Kind of what you're asking is, how do you have your audience of people who are naturally inclined to, it's probably this crowd here, engage with this topic. How do you reach people who aren't? And so I would say, one really beautiful thing that we did in the exhibit that we tried to preserve in the book was we had a response wall where we posed a question, if you could change anything about Louisiana's system of incarceration, where would you start? And we had Post-it notes and people left thousands of comments over the run of the show. We also had a notebook where people could leave feedback. And I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody who found their way up to the galleries and walked through Captive State had a positive experience or a change of heart necessarily, but I think people were challenged, and I think people had to sit with their discomfort, and some of the responses kind of spoke to that. And even if that initial response is negative, who's to say what that might transform inside that person after the fact? So we were in a unique position in that we were able to engage with a lot of folks who weren't seeking it out. I'm still kind of trying to figure out that other part where, with a book, with Captive State, I'm sure with Jailhouse Lawyer, you go and you do a lot of talks. I guess you just kind of hope that when you're in front of a crowd, you might get a few people who learn something and are changed, and then they go tell somebody, and then that person goes tell somebody, and that's kind of the ripple effect.
I'll just say with the Visiting Room Project, the idea behind that project was that we, as Andrea was saying earlier, close the doors and then we never go back and try to understand who's in our prisons or what their stories are, especially 10 or 20 or 30 years after we've done that. And so the idea with the Visiting Room Project was, what if we got to meet that person 30 years later and hear what they've been up to and what their life, has looked like in that longer arc, and would there be points of connection there that would help us think differently about whether that person should be in prison at all? Whether it was effective or not is, a separate question, but that was sort of the idea.
Yeah, so when I came home, a lot of people would say, well, Calvin, you seem to have it going on. You want to go to school, and I'm telling you, there's a whole lot of people in prison that wants to do these things. And the whole idea, like Sophie said, Professor Marcus, well, let's go interview these people. Let's go and let the world see, and let them decide whether this is what you want to keep on doing, But it goes right back to getting proximate with it. I think by telling those stories, but just telling them, like, I read a lot of news articles too, and what I'm missing is that human part. You know, like what they might say, where this person was denied, whatever, the court ruled that the person was denied a fair trial. But they don't go into the human part. They don't go into, like, oh, this person was executed. Okay, what is that? Paint that picture of that execution. That person was hung in their head because he was heavy, the whole head came off. Being more descriptive, but people can actually feel it. And I think that's what's always missing, not criticizing the newspaper, but I think that's always missing. Like when people, I read a lot of books when they say, like, a person, like Napa book, that's Isaac Napa. He's another one that's professional boxer. Had he not been illegally sent to prison, he probably would have been a Mike Tyson thing, because he was really good at a young age. He has a book, and he described the lady and the victim family and him. They actually created. They wrote the book together. But what I'm saying, we don't hear that emotional part. We just hear that 16-year-old committed a murder. Okay, well, that 16-year-old probably was protecting his parent, or that 16-year-old got caught shoplifting. We don't say why. And so I think by telling these stories, telling the stories about why this is happening outside of just, other than just saying it happened. I think that's because, like when I write a brief, I'm generally trying to get the judge. A lawyer told us, Chris Aberley, I wrote him, I said, how do you seem to be very successful in winning cases. He said, you tell that story. And he tells a story. He talks about the client. He talks about, in one case, he was saying that this guy worked, he loved his wife, his children. He made his living by driving trucks. And one day he came home and he opened a door and, he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And at that moment, he just went black. He told that story, what happened to that guy that might have committed, I don't want to get into too many details, but you can see it, this man drive trucks. He taking care of his family, and one day he come home and he sees something he's not supposed to see. I think telling that story, and constantly telling that story, telling the human toll of it, like in the book it talks about when a God of hope left me. Well, I just didn't want to say, well, I was going to kill myself. No, I had it planned. In the book tells me I had it planned to the T, every detail. I think that would be what I would suggest, is that we just got to keep telling these stories, and we just got to keep on believing that sometimes we go to dark places in our mind, and we think that the punishment justified no matter what. Keep telling them, and I'm going to tell them, every time I tell a story, every time I talk about we should not let injustice happen on our watch, I can start the story off and talk about, this lady. This is how it started off. There's a lady that was about to be stoned. This lady was given the death penalty for a crime, for allegations that she did wrong. And they was about to kill her. And they had this guy saying, look, not on my watch. And then, I just told the story. But if I started off about when Jesus said this, everybody go, oh Lord. But if I talk about this lady about to get executed, and they were about to stone her, and then I say this guy, I can say as a lawyer, this guy step up and say, not on my watch, it ain't happening. People get it. And that goes right back to being proximate with it. Like Brian Stevenson said, that in one of the books he wrote about Brian Stevenson, he said we got to become stone catchers. We do. We have to be the one to say, not on my watch. This ain't happening. I know there's a group of people that wants to incarcerate people. I know the group of people that just a handful people that they just evil. You know, the Bible talks about those hamers of the world. And we just got to figure out how to crush them out, and we just got to stand up for those people. I'm kind of going on. Tell them stories. Tell a story after story. And that story touches us. I know it touches me.
Actually, I have a question for you, Dr. Armstrong. Calvin jogged this in my head, which is this book, Captive State, really doesn't exist without her efforts. When we launched the exhibition, we didn't have a plan to make it into a book. And after experiencing it in person at our launch, she said, we need to make this book. We need to tell this story. Nobody has knit this history of 300 years together in this way. She said, people can use this in court. I said, people can use this in court? She said, yeah, people need stories. People, I'm not a lawyer, but apparently judges like to hear a story, like Calvin said. And, so my hope is that this book can get used in that fashion, but maybe you can talk a little bit about why you thought that and why that is important for you to document stories and facts and details so that you can use not just stories to move people's hearts, but, change the law.
So, what we do as lawyers is we create records, right? But the art of it is to wrap the record in the story, right? Because ultimately you're trying to convince people, whether it's a jury or whether it's a judge, that the rule can be changed, because the law actually is not good. Like 5 Supreme Court justices have decided that they are going to defer to whatever decision that prison administrator has made. And so the law usually isn't on our side. And so what does that mean? You have to empower somebody to feel like, yes, I can change it and I should change it, right? So that's where the art of lawyering comes in. That's where the storytelling comes in. But in order to tell a story, you have to have the facts. And the facts have to be uncontroversial, right? Like, it can't be a debate. And so one of the things that Captive State did incredibly well, and part of this was their dedication, and part of this was they decided to create a community advisory board with a whole slew of people, including people who had spent a significant amount of time behind bars, is they were able to incorporate what we do to people within a historical record. And that had never been done. There had been stories that said, yes, in 1837 we did this, in 1845 we did this, but those are histories that were told by the victors, by the people who controlled the vehicles of communication. Those weren't narratives that included the experience of what it meant to carry around a 13.5-pound iron ball for years as your sentence. And so I think that that's the way that this works, right? Can I go into court and say, Your Honor, I would like to introduce this book as Exhibit 1? Probably not, right? But what you can do in your briefs, like, we are sometimes a little bit too conservative. But I have put pictures in a brief, right? Tell me I can't. Strike it from the record, fine, but then you've already seen it. So, I think that this combination of art and document and fact and narrative and experience over such an extended amount of time, from start to current, has never been done, and we needed to preserve it. And I'm really, really grateful to the people of the Historic New Orleans Collection who decided to take that chance and to do things completely contrary to the way that they have done every other exhibit book that they've ever produced. But they did it for this one, and I'm very grateful for it.
Thank you.
So I think we have a half hour left, and I want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. Does anybody would like to ask a question?
I'm not sure I need a microphone.
No, you don't.
So, Mr. Duncan, I implore you to venture into the stories at Verite News that Rich has written about criminal justice, criminal injustice. And I think you get it, that a lot of the sensitivities that you talk about there. And I have 1,000 questions. But first I'd like to say this is an incredible panel. And I'm not sure I've seen a more expert panel in my life. But for you, Mr. Duncan, you have this demeanor where you are really calm. You seem happy generally, right? Why aren't you pissed? Well, I mean, I think if this happened to me, I would be mad, right? I mean, I would come out there, you know, I mean, I got mad at somebody when I was driving. Right? But I just, why aren't you, don't answer why you aren't mad. I think the question is, how do you not be mad, right?
That's a good question. So the question in my mind was, who do I get pissed off at? What they did to me, and what they do to a whole lot of people, is what the law allowed. You know, slavery was the law, Jim Crow was the law. So I couldn't get angry at the young lady that made a mistake in identifying me. That's not, I could get angry at the detective that withheld the evidence, but we have laws that protects them when they do that. So I direct all my energy and anger in changing the law, trying to take the power that gave them that authority to do, allowed them to do it. When I got out, I used to go talk to judges, and I was getting angry. I said, why they don't see the things that I see? And then I realized, well, it's not their fault. They've never been a prisoner. They never was on trial. They never was a defendant. Like, you know, they never sat in that seat. They never. They didn't get to know them better. They thinking about surviving. It's a job. So it's like, okay, well, I understand. And then I talked to some of my other elected officials. They never been a prisoner. They don't know. But they are given the power to do something about it, but they have no clue of a fair trial. They never was deprived of one. They never been, probably they never went to bed hungry. Some of them get up there and say, well, I remember having to eat peanut butter sandwiches. But what helps me is when I learn about the people that we have given all this power. That to me is so scary. That we give people power over us, and these people have no clue of the harm they're doing us. They have no clue. So if I come across as being, you know, my people is with if you didn't have that power, if you didn't have that authority, you wouldn't be allowed to do that to me. You wouldn't. You wouldn't be allowed to put handcuffs on me. You wouldn't be allowed to say, sit over there and tell my family or to deprive me. You wouldn't have none of that authority. If you didn't have that badge and that gun and that National Guards, the FBI behind you, you wouldn't be able to do any of that. So I direct all my attention to the people. We have given individuals unlimited power over our life. And we never We don't know anything about them. That's the crazy part of that. But that calmness, because I don't know who to get angry at. I can't get angry at the individual, but I can get pissed off at that law that says, I'm going to allow you to determine what is exculpatory evidence. I'm going to give you power to say, the discretion to give this 16-year-old life in prison. So my beef is always with the law and not with the individual, especially when I'm talking to judges. I'm like, well, you don't see by bringing this guy previous conviction, telling the jury that they've been previously convicted is take the jury mind about this individual that's on trial because they never was on trial. So yeah, that's my answer. Yeah.
You talked about, control, right? So historically, prisons were run by the state. What challenges do you see with so much of the privatization coming in, whether it's the whole prison or it's the privatization of the telecommunications to be taken away in prison visits now? People have to pay to use online communication or the tablets that are in some prisons now that are limiting what media and books they have access to. Just kind of, what challenges with all the privatization that's happening in prisons now?
So I'm not generally the person who distinguishes between private prisons and publicly run prisons, because I think one of the things that I was really glad that the curators and that the Historic New Orleans collection brought up across the ages is that prisons have been sources of revenue generation since time immemorial, right? So there were, there were receipts in that exhibit where the prisons would pay people who, for enslaved labor, right? There were, people could pay guards to whip people that were enslaved. They could bring them there for discipline, right? And so they have always been that way. It was just a matter of like who was getting the change. And so what is happening now with increasing privatization of services, right? So that's healthcare, that's visitation, that's communication, that's commissary, which is basically like their ability to purchase anything from like soap, toothbrushes, clothes, notebooks. All of that is now being run through private providers, but the prison still gets a kickback on those contracts, right? So we, the public, we get money back, right? From exploiting families and people who are working for, if they're in prison, they're allowed to earn a wage after 3 years of working for free. And that wage, what they get to keep is 2 cents an hour if they're in the field, right? That entire structure is set up to benefit our tax dollars, right? And so I don't make those distinctions necessarily because I think it's running the way it always has.
And prison create jobs. You build them, got to be fed. Unfortunately, in Louisiana, we use, and throughout this country, we use human beings to provide jobs. That is the, like, when I first went to Angola, you could barely get down that road because it had no pavement. Now their streets are better than New Orleans streets. Because they get lots of money to have us in prison. And a lot of people have a lot of, it's the biggest job market. If for some reason that Angola closed down, that's a whole town of people, that's a whole area without a job. And until we figure out how to do something with our hands, create some stuff, and not rely on human beings to make money, we're going to keep having this mass incarceration. We got to figure out, we constantly doing the same thing we did during the slavery time. We're using human beings to provide jobs, money. We need to be thinking about this. let's build some cars. Let's build some, we'll do something. Let's create some trees. But we constantly have this thing that I'm going to use human beings to create a job for somebody else. And until we do that, we're going to have prisons after prison, whether it's private prison. And look right now. They turned a part of Angola that was closed down. And guess what? They're not putting me in there. They're putting people that came to this country to find a new life. They're putting them in there. And they're going to put a lot of people in there, believe me. And they're going to make a lot of money. And these people came here just to find, like everybody, to find a new way of life. They recreate our Constitution. It's beautiful on paper. And now we're about to incarcerate all of those people because they're going to create a good revenue for that area. And I don't make a distinction. You build them, they're going to put them, somebody's going to have to fill them up. And we just got to start thinking as a nation, how can we provide jobs for people outside of in prison and in bondage and individuals?
I think with that, this is a wonderful panel, by the way. With ICE, I saw on WWL that there was either online or on TV, there was a Know Your Rights panel that was just like a broadcast to the public, which I thought was really interesting because I haven't seen that through news before. And I was curious what the role, like the media, like you've done, it's educational, but what is the role of educating us citizens of our rights? That we know that, like, in the Constitution, as we said, but like, what role does media have in doing that going forward? And also, like, is this something that we need to continue to do for everybody, especially as we're facing who we're facing in the executive office?
Did you hear?
And I'm sorry. And what do you think of the Angola prison rodeo?
Okay, so I can know my rights. I can tell the police officer, I don't have to say anything to you. I have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Or I don't have to let you search my car without a search warrant. You can't come in my house. Now I'm telling this to a person that don't respect the Fourth Amendment under no circumstances. We have entrusted this person. This person is going to determine whether I exercise or I enjoy this right. So I do see those commercials about know your rights, know your rights, know your rights. But those people that we have given authority to determine whether we're going to enjoy those rights. That's like if I'm stopped in my car and the police officer pull me over and say, do you have your driving license? Oh, I have a right to remain silent. You do. Get in the back of this car now. Now you're going to jail. It's kind of like, okay, you have a right to counsel when you go to, you have a lawyer, you have a right to a lawyer, okay? Now the government has determined that I'm going to get, this is the kind of lawyer I want you to have. I'm not going to fund the indigent defense program. The second question that I'm going to let the media answer first, the rodeo. I hear a lot of people that's pissed off about that rodeo. And I do get it. But the rodeo provides money. The prison don't give us shampoo. The prison don't give us deodorant. The prison don't give us money to pay for our records. When you get to Angola, you start earning, but you only get 2 cents an hour. 2 cents. And you don't get that until you've been there 3 years. So the rodeo has now become the only source of revenue for people in prison. So I often tell people, if you're pissed off at the rodeo, first ask them, the rodeo help us get our records, sometimes send money to our families, sometimes the rodeo provides that revenue. And I'm not saying the rodeo is a good thing, but it provides things for us. And so whoever is pissed off about the rodeo, they need to come and help us get those things, and then we won't have to run about behind a bull to get the car just to send some money to our children, or to pay for our records, or to try to get a lawyer, or try to get the ordering and shampoo. We participate in the rodeo because we need things the institution don't provide. And that is our only source. So I generally tell people that if they're pissed off at the rodeo, find somebody in prison and provide that for them, and then they won't have to go out there and injure themselves trying to get the token off the bull. I've never been to rodeo. While I was in prison, I never went, but I understand why people do go, because they're trying to get some funds to do something. They're trying to get the order, and they're trying to get their records. They're trying to get save up enough money to send to a lawyer to represent them, to try to get their police reports. Yeah, so that's my take concerning the rodeo. And I'm gonna turn it over to that media question.
And I saw that story, and I also thought it was interesting because they have, and I think it was the same story, an attorney going and informing service workers in preparation for the Border Patrol coming. And I had the same thing, because it's like, know your rights, like, they don't have a warrant, they can't do anything to you, and it's like, well, listen, you've seen all the videos, and ICE is doing whatever they want. But so far as like whether it's up to the media to inform people of their rights, I don't know if we would do a story saying, here are your rights, but we can do a story showing where someone's rights were violated. And we can quote someone saying, you know, this is the violation of the rights. And I think that is going to be a more impactful way of getting that across, as opposed to just sort of like enumerating someone's rights. You can show where the rights were violated, and for me, reading those stories, I'm super outraged, and then that's how you sort of learn, okay, here's the rights that were violated, and that informs you. I don't know if that answers the question, but I feel like, yes, there should be more of those stories, instead of just like, this happened, and moving on. You can sort of go deeper and explain, like, this happened, but also this is why it is so outrageous. I don't know if that answered the question, but does anybody else have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Wonderful panel. Thank you so much. Toward the proximity that you spoke of and restoring like the public's understanding of like the humanity of people who are in prison, like it's great that the books came out and the exhibit came out, and what would you see as the structural impediments to getting those stories out? Because I know it's not easy, and I know that the erasure of people who are in prison is important. You talked about the plates going up over the window and the problems with the communication. What are the sort of structural impediments that journalists or just how do we learn more about that? What are the impediments to getting those stories out?
So every year I teach a seminar with 20 law students, and we file anywhere from 100 to 150 public records requests with every single jail, prison, and youth detention center in the state of Louisiana. And it is a year-long effort to extract a simple list of who died behind bars and from what. I can't tell you how many hours it takes. And that's because, one, our public records law has a lot of problems, including one that says that if you're incarcerated, you are quote unquote not an eligible person. It says you are not a person to request records. But two, like there's a ton of exceptions. The records are expensive. So one of the things that we do is we'll finally extract as much as we can, right, without litigation, and then we'll post that information, and then families will contact me and say, how did you get records about my cousin's death or about my son's death? We still haven't gotten the records. And so I'll say, well, they're like, well, why didn't you get the records? They're like, well, they offered us the records, but it was gonna cost $700. Right? And so I think part of the structural impediments is the way that law protects what happens behind the wire from public view. One of those mechanisms is through a really difficult public records law that could use a lot of significant improvements. Like if there's one thing that you could ask your legislators for, it would be, okay, so I want permanent structural methods of transparency. It should not be that Loyola law students are the only source for knowing who's died behind bars in Louisiana. That is a state function. Why isn't the Department of Health collecting and analyzing that information?
Anybody else? We have time for like one more question.
If no other questions.
Oh, there's one waving to the far.
Sorry, hi, so my question is for Mr. Duncan. I don't know if anyone here knows about Norway's maximum sentence laws, but here in the United States, you hear a lot of stories about how someone will be served 3 life sentences. In Norway, the maximum sentence you can give someone is 21 years. I was curious if you had an opinion on whether or not the United States needed a maximum sentence that could not be overreached, and what you think it should be.
So she's saying that in Norway, there is a maximum sentence that someone can get, 21 years, and she's asking, do you believe that this country should have one of those laws in place as well, where the maximum sentence for any crime would be 21 years?
Well, if I was a lawmaker, what I would do, sending a person to prison would be the last thing, really. If somebody did something, I would have them diagnosed, send them to an institution to figure out what happened, not a prison, or send them to a clinic to see what's going on in that person's mind. Sometimes I tell guys that's doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, and I tell them, look, you get busted, you get busted with that gun, you could get 10 years minimum. Oh man, that's wrong. They shouldn't give us 10 years. I said, well, you need to become a lawmaker. Introduce a bill that say if you get caught with a gun, you don't get any time. I know that don't answer the question. If it was up to me, this is the way if a kid do something before the age of 24, because we have done enough brain studies that talks about the brain. If you do something before the age of 24, I'm gonna send you somewhere. It's not somewhere. I'm gonna try to get you some help to figure out what's going on with you. You might be depressed, you might be hopeless, you might be disillusioned about life. But I wouldn't think about sending them to prison. Because I know prison is not the answer. I know that because I've been in prison. Does the outside world know that prison is not the answer? Only the ones, if they've been in prison, they realize prison is nothing but a means by which we provide jobs for somebody. Simple as that. It ain't about rehabilitation. It's not about any of that. That might have been a thought a long time ago, but not right. Right now today, it provides jobs and only jobs. Because when I got out of prison, first, in prison, I know people was in prison for little quantity of drugs. But then when I got out, I think about 2 months later, I moved uptown on Pine and Simple, 1 block from the boot. And they smoke weed, they do all kind of pills there. But none of them go to jail. I don't see the police jumping out saying, come here, you get arrested because you had a small amount of pills. And so, to me, prison is just not the answer. We need to figure out, just like if an airplane falls out the sky, we'll spend $1 billion trying to figure out why. And I give an example about the place that I love, Oregon, where the salmon, they got this thing with the salmon. And every year, if they got 100 salmon that come through there every year, if one missing, all hell breaks loose. They study the environment, the water, the son, why that one did not get up here. That's what we should do when the mind get all racked up. We need to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what happened. But I want to go back and I want to say about, they passed a law. When we start getting access to some of our records, they passed a law here in Louisiana that says people like me is not to be considered as a person for the purpose of getting our records. We just got access to them. We did show getting access to those records proved that a lot of people should never have been in prison. And soon as they realized that, they created a barrier to stop us from getting the records. When we determined, as a state, we voted that we didn't want non-unanimous jury verdicts. Meaning, we didn't want people being sentenced to life when all of the jurors did not agree. When we did that, they passed a law that same year telling the judges, seal those damn records so that they don't get them. And that is thousands of people in prison with a non-unanimous jury verdict. The Supreme Court said that none of these people have a jury verdict. They shouldn't be there, but they can't get their record because as soon as we passed a law that says that we don't want non-unanimous jury verdict, we also passed a law sealing the records.
So listen, so we're at our time limit. I want to thank, Sophie, do you want to say one thing? Okay, sure. So I want to thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. I'd just like to close with a quote from one of Mr. Duncan's favorite books that is mentioned in the Jailhouse Lawyer many times, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It speaks to the courage he and so many others have exhibited in oftentimes really horrific circumstances. And the quote says, "Everything can be taken away from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And I think that you really exemplified that. And I want to thank you, Sophie, Nick, Andrea.
Just one quick thing before we roll out. Number one, be sure to grab a postcard with a QR code that will tell you everything we've got going on. If you like tonight, you're gonna love the last thing we have, and you're gonna love everything in between. So come back the next few days, catch Words of Music. Also, I really want to thank the people in the front row right here, Historic New Orleans Collection. You all have been such a big part of this festival. This is now the fourth Words of Music in a row that we have featured an HNOC book in partnership with HNOC. We look forward to many more books, many more collaborative efforts. Thank you so much for always being behind a tiny little organization that just wants people to read. Thank you, HNOC.